Hey there, sociology students. So guess what? You made it to your final lesson, and it is on one that I'm excited to share with you. It is marriage and family, and I have a little bit of experience with this. So let's get started. So what is a family? What are some of those themes that are universal? Well, this is kind of the hard part, is that defining a family is kind of difficult. Usually there are those exceptions to every element that one person may find essential to define a family. So we look at this as very broad terms from that sociological perspective. These are people who are related by blood, marriage, or adoption. And by adoption, I mean informal or formal. Okay. Universally, marriage and family are mechanisms for governing mate selection, reckoning descent, determining descendant lines, and establishing inheritance and authority. So families are very important, sociologically speaking. So let's look at our different perspectives. What do our sociological theorists have to say about the family? So if we're looking at a functionalist perspective, functionalists examine the functions and dysfunctions of a family and their life together. So examples would include things like incest, and how the weakened family functions actually increase divorce. Okay. A conflict perspective on marriage would focus on the inequality in marriage, especially the unequal and changing power between husbands and wives. So to kind of illustrate this, you can see in 2008, 43% of households in the United States actually talked about that their wives make more decisions for the household, whereas 26% say husbands make more decisions, and 31% say that couples actually divide decisions equally. Another great figure to look at is the two paycheck marriages. Like, how do wives and husbands actually divide their responsibilities? And you can see they have it delineated between paid work, housework, and childcare. And as we can see, we see a little bit happening here and changes happening as we move along. And I think probably one of the most significant ones is in childcare, watching children. But you can still see that there's a fairly unequal balance here between wives and husbands. Okay, definitely not like that in my family, I have to say. We are a very, very equal family in housework, paid work, and childcare. I don't know, we're super progressive or something. So what a symbolic interactionist perspective on marriage and family be? Well, they examine the contrasting experiences and perspectives of men and women in marriage. And they really stress that you really have to understand both the perspectives of wives and husbands in order for us to understand behavior within a family. There are also major elements of the family life cycle that we had to talk about. So things are like love and courtship, the really fun time in a relationship where you are being courted by your boyfriend. Like my husband took us on our first date to the wonderful Castles and Coasters, and we played mini golf and ate some Cold Stone afterwards. I have to tell you, he already knew the weight of my heart was ice cream. And then marriage, childbirth, child rearing, so raising children, and then the family later in life once children have left the nest, so to speak. So most mate selection follows the patterns of age, social class, and race and ethnicity, okay? Child rearing patterns vary by social class, however. Well, how significant, since we brought up race and ethnicity before in this course, how significant is it to family life? Well, the primary distinction in social class, is social class, not race and ethnicity. So really it's where you were raised and how you were raised, not necessarily your racial and ethnic background that is going to determine how you marry. Not to say that it doesn't play a factor, but social class is more important. Case in point, perfect example, my husband and I. He is obviously not Caucasian like I am. He is Korean. But he was raised by a white family. His last name is Lindenmeyer. I did take my husband's last name. But he is Korean and I am Caucasian, and we function very well as that perfect American family. But we did grow up with very similar middle social class, America. We have very similar religious and moral backgrounds, and this is really why we function the way that we do. Actually function very well together, I have to say. We have very little in common, but for whatever reason, we work great. So, what other diversity do we see in U.S. families? Okay, there are families that have one parent. So we have those single parent families. And I'm telling you what, more power to them, because when my husband is gone and I have a couple days alone with my kids, I'm ready to pull my hair out. So we also have childless families, blended families, and gay and lesbian families. And each has its unique characteristics, but social class is important in determining their primary characteristics. Poverty is especially significant for one-parent families, most of which are headed by women, which is why it's actually a big social issue today. So what are some major changes that are happening in U.S. families? There are 3 that are of note. The first one is the postponement of the first marriage, which simply means that people are getting married later in life for their first marriage. And there's also an increase in cohabitation. So couples are living together before they are married, or they're living together not necessarily ever with the intention of getting married, but this is just a new trend. And they're also waiting to have their first child at a later age, which kind of goes all hand in hand with the postponement of the first marriage. I was not that person. I got married at 23. My husband was 25, and I had my son at 25, so it was literally exactly a year and a half later. So, with more people living longer, however, a lot of middle-aged couples find themselves sandwiched between rearing their children, raising their kids, and taking care of their aging parents, which causes a lot of stress and strain on the family. But what you may not know about marriage is that it's actually health-wise very beneficial. If you are married and you stay married, you have a lot longer life in general. So they just think that this is because you are usually a little bit more contented, and some of the responsibilities of life are divvied up among partners, which actually causes a little bit less stress. Another thing that just kills me, I think it's so awesome and weird, but if you look at this, it's almost like exact opposites, right, of where we are. So at the beginning, in like the 1930s, you can kind of see the trend was we really want to have, all the way up through the 60s, larger families, 3 or more children. That was ideal for the Americans. But we've seen like a practical flip here, moving into our time frame, that 0, 1, or 2 children is more preferable in our families. And I have a boy and a girl, and God willing, we are done. So, what's the current divorce rate? Depending on what numbers you choose to compare, you can produce rates between 20% and 50% on the divorce rate end, okay? How do children and their parents adjust to divorce? Well, divorce is difficult for children, whose adjustment problems often continue into adulthood. Consequences of divorce are passed on to grandchildren as well. However, it has been noted that fathers that have frequent contact with their children after divorce are more likely to maintain it, which is actually a really good thing. Okay. What are the 2 sides of families? Well, there's the, bright side. Most people find marriage and family to be very rewarding, but there are also problems with spousal abuse, child abuse, marital rape, and incest, which are all a misuse of family power. But don't worry, most of the time, it's good. Okay. What is the likely future of marriage and family? Well, we can expect cohabitation births to unmarried women and age at first marriage to continue to increase. This is a scientific trend right now that has not shown any stopping. Okay. The growing numbers of women in the workforce are also likely to continue to shift the balance of marital power from what we've seen it in prior generations. So, throughout history, technology has also had an impact on families, and I feel like today is no exception, and we've kind of been looking into this a little bit throughout this course and how technology is impacting our culture and how technology is impacting society, and I kind of am looking forward to some more of those thoughts and studies on how technology is actually impacting the way in which family functions. So, that is it, my fine friends. You did it. Congratulations. I'm really happy that you have made it through your final lesson, and I hope you enjoy this last unit of the course. Let me know if you have any questions, and thanks so much, guys.